All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Spring 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners, and during this presentation, we welcome Windtree Therapeutics, ticker symbol of WINT, on the NASDAQ, and the company's Chief Executive Officer, Craig Fraser. Today, I've asked Craig to run through the slide presentation, and we will then engage in a short fireside chat-like Q&A session. Before I do turn it over to Craig, I want to remind everyone that the company is available for one-on-one meetings later this week. If you've not already signed up, you can send me an email, and that's Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com, or you can visit the website at lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button, and we'll look to get you taken care of. So with that said, let me turn the presentation over to Craig Fraser, Chief Executive Officer, Windtree Therapeutics. Craig, please proceed.
Thank you, Robert. I hope everybody is doing well and has a very productive conference. I'm going to share my slides very quickly here. And I've been looking forward to talking with all of you and bringing you up to speed on what we have going on at Windtree, which is quite a bit. And we're entering a period where we have a number of milestones right out in front of the company and for our shareholders. So this is a very good time to be looking at Windtree and coming up to speed on the company, because it's an exciting year ahead. I'll be making some forward-looking statements today. I just would refer you to all of our public filings, including our recently filed 10-K. So Windtree is a biotech company. We're located in an area called Bucks County, Pennsylvania, between New York and Philadelphia. And we're a company that is advancing a few late-stage clinical programs. A primary focus is in acute cardiovascular. We also have some acute respiratory disease work. As mentioned by Robert, we trade on NASDAQ under WINT. And our programs are focused on these really important markets with significant unmet needs. And I know everybody says significant unmet needs, but the fact of the matter is our programs have supportive regulatory pathways because of the pronounced need. A couple of our programs have fast track designation. We have orphan drug designation. In one program that is the next milestone of a data card in the next few weeks, we believe has the opportunity, if the data supports it, of even achieving a breakthrough designation as a potential accelerated pathway, which is difficult to get outside the world of oncology, but it's focused on a really important area. We have, as I mentioned a moment ago, several clinical and business milestones, making for a very news-laden and milestone-laden year ahead, starting in the next several weeks. And we're led by a management team that across the board has fantastic experience. I'm really proud of our team and their ability to execute and deliver. This is our portfolio that you see on this slide, led by an asset called istaroxene. Now, ista's been under development for acute heart failure, patients hospitalized due to their heart failure. It has a fast track designation from the FDA. ISTA for acute heart failure has positive phase 2A and positive phase 2B data. We've brought it in, put it in front of the top heart failure experts in the US and Europe. Their excitement truly made us that much more excited about what the future could hold for ISTA and its potential to treat an area that has such a big need. We are at the stage of planning our next heart failure study. That'll be a 300-patient study that I'll tell you about that will be in a position to start later this year. We also opened up a second possible indication that we think is a great opportunity for the company and for ISTA, and that is around early cardiogenic shock. And in fact, it was coming out of the engagements with the FDA and our CMO talking to the project manager and thinking through what would a breakthrough designation possibly be supported by. And with our scientific advisors in these discussions came the idea of early cardiogenic shock. This is an area that has high mortality and morbidity associated with it. and has an opportunity, as I'll explain to you, to have what is a pathway that can move possibly even faster and less expensive in terms of scale and cost and speed than even the bigger area of heart failure. We recently just completed enrollment in a cardiogenic shock study, and that data is going to read out here later this month in April. Behind ISTA, we also have follow-on heart failure assets. ISTA is a dual mechanism, a really unique mechanism of action is circuit 2A activation. And we've taken that knowledge, and this has been a very sought after target in the world of heart failure, but it's been elusive. It's really been our team, a scientific team that has been able to get it circuit 2A activation. And we've now built a library of early assets that are also oral. ISTA's an IV for hospitalized patients, but the oral agents could treat chronic heart failure as well. And as a platform with follow-on next generation and oral and ISTA creates a really nice heart failure platform to do programs, build value, do transactions and partnering with. I won't be talking about our respiratory side of our business today. That's based on a synthetic surfactant, KL4 surfactant. But we recently just wrapped up a study in COVID-19 feasibility, safety, and some physiological change study in patients that are on ventilators and respiratory failure, ARDS. We read that out here last month. And this whole platform is partnered. And in fact, our partner is advancing it so that we concentrate our focus and our energy on our cardiovascular side of our business. But we have a long history in that area. So our landscape looks like this. Cardiogenic shock studies wrapped up. We have a 30-day follow-up on the last patient enrolled. We'll get the database lock here in the next few weeks, break the blind, and read out that information before the end of this month, April. If the data is what we expect and hope, we'll go engage with the FDA on what a registration pathway could look like. What would phase 3 look like for this? We'll put a proposal into place. We're also, in parallel this year, going to be running an extension study to the study that we just wrapped up that is going to explore more dosing and dose optimization to support not only shock, but heart failure that I'll tell you about. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we're prepared to start our next heart failure study that will move us towards phase 3. And we are advancing the oral circuit 2A activators. And we have a lot going on with the business development front, including with our respiratory business and some other assets. So let me just spend a few moments talking about ISTA and its 2 programs. Heart failure, beginning with heart failure. We probably have all had relatives with heart failure. It's super prevalent. In fact, when patients have heart failure, they'll have these episodes where they have decompensated acute heart failure, where the body's trying to respond to the lack of perfusion and output, and it creates a very unstable situation. They start retaining fluid, and they go into the hospital. And they'll be in the hospital for about a week and a half or so. In fact, hospitalizations due to heart failure are the #1 reason for hospitalizations in the US and Europe and people over the age of 65. It's that common, close to 1.5 million admissions per year. There's pronounced inpatient mortality. It's the most expensive Medicare diagnosis. And here's the thing, despite growing prevalence, despite growing hospitalizations and even mortality in the US going the wrong direction recently, there's been no new therapies for the hospitalized acute patient in nearly 2 decades. But what has changed recently is new heart failure development guidance by the FDA that gives some flexibility around endpoints. So it's a really good time to do this work. And when patients come in this crisis due to their heart failure into the hospital, they hit the emergency department to put on powerful IV diuretics and begin the multi-day process of trying to mobilize fluid out of their lungs, get them peeing it off, and get them dried out over the course of several days. And then doctors are turning their attention to improving cardiac function to try to get them out of that decompensated state and get them tuned up, heart functioning better, get their blood pressure up, which is critical, and then get them converted over to oral medicines that they'll be on for discharge and healthy, hopefully a discharge to not boomerang back in. Here's the problem. The agents that they have to work with for cardiac function, based on their mechanism of action, have a lot of rate-limiting toxicities and limits their use. They can cause rhythm disturbances, increase myocardial oxygen demand, which is the opposite of what you want to do because that can damage the heart. And in particular, they can drop blood pressure even further. These afterload reducers, if you will, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do. You're trying to perfuse the body. In fact, when somebody has lower blood pressure, they have longer length of stays, more events. They tend to get discharged, not dried out in a less healthy state. And I bring that up because that's a good area for us to use an enriching strategy, if you will, with those patients in our study, because our mechanism of action that makes this so unique, first of all, it's a dual mechanism. We work on both cycles of the heart. And the first mechanism increases the force of contraction with each and every heartbeat. And then the really novel mechanism working in the diastolic phase between each heartbeat is circulatory activation, takes calcium back up out of the tissues, and it causes a greater relaxation of the heart in between heartbeats. And that works like a sponge to pull blood into the heart. You get a greater fill volume of blood. So now you're working with more blood on the next heartbeat and more calcium available to make the next contraction that much stronger. And by working in both cycles of the heart, we've seen not only really nice efficacy picture so far, but we seem to be avoiding many of these side effects of the older existing agents. And in particular, it's painting a really unique clinical picture that us and our scientific advisors are finding very attractive. Now, we've studied this in 2 big blinded studies of hospitalized patients due to their heart failure, phase 2A, 120 patients receiving 3 different doses infused for 6 hours. And we saw that the wedge pressure in the heart, which is a measurement of back versus forward flow, and that the heart worked better, more blood pumped out of the heart with each and every heartbeat. And we saw a nice safety picture. So then we moved to a phase 2B, another 120 patients hospitalized due to heart failure. This time, 2 doses were taken forward, and this time infusing for 24 hours. And I'll just run through the results very quickly. Again, the primary measurement dealt with wedge pressure in the heart and this forward flow. And here it was an echocardiography measurement of it, E to E prime, and we saw wedge pressures of the heart, E to E prime, decreased with both doses very nicely and statistically significant. And then very importantly, the amount of blood coming out of the heart, stroke volume, was significantly increased with both doses as well. And then this efficacy did not come at the expense of dropping blood pressure. And in fact, because we were getting good cardiac function and output, filling up the pipes, perfusing the body, and in fact, blood pressure went up. Again, this is highly desirable, and in fact, statistically so at the high dose. And kidneys tend to like blood pressure. It's how they function better. So we saw the renal profile as measured by filtration rate, stable to increasing significantly so at the high dose. And this is really important as you're trying to dry out the patient, mobilize fluid, and get them peeing it off. Again, really unique clinical picture. The other unique part of what we were seeing in the clinic was lowering of heart rate. So making for a more efficient pump, less energy used with more output with each and every heartbeat, that positive effects towards myocardial oxygen demand, which is so important in heart failure, acute heart failure management. From a safety profile, cardiac troponin Ts measures damage of the heart were clean before and after infusions, as was a nice clinically significant arrhythmia profile. So what we're doing next is we're going to do another bigger phase 2B, where we're going to go up to 300 patients, 60 to 70 centers globally. And what we want to do here is put it in the strongest phase 3 ready and as efficient and de-risked a position, and in a position for partnership as well, by doing this study where we leverage the characteristics of istaroxime, particularly in an enrichment strategy with those patients with lower blood pressure who also happen to be diuretic resistant oftentimes. We want to infuse and dose optimize pre-phase 3 by taking the infusions longer than 24 hours, so for 2 or 3 days. And importantly, we saw some clinical outcome signals like reduced hospital length of stay and so forth that we want to fully see through. These are the measures, these clinical outcome measures that will be needed for phase 3. And we want to put a couple secondaries in that we can pick and choose what would be the best primary measure for phase 3 to design that around things like reduced hospital length of stay with a 30-day follow-up. Now, let me shift gears and tell you about cardiogenic shock and this next big milestone. We're really excited about this. Patients who have cardiogenic shock have a more severe form of heart failure. In fact, their heart is failing so much and they're really not pumping out to the body adequately to the point that it'll begin to start affect of vital organs like the brain and kidneys. Here, their blood pressure is crashing out. Now, our systolic blood pressure average, say, is 120, that top number. These people's blood pressure is crashing down in the 70s, maybe even down in the 60s. It's a super urgent situation because it has pretty significant, even inpatient mortality of about a third of these patients will not survive this episode. They get rushed off to the operating or cath lab to get a mechanical device put in, and really any therapeutics are reserved as just like rescue medicines and pressors. We have done the work in this last quarter to totally value the market off claims database and Epi globally, assuming different prices, and it's about a $1.25 billion market. There's a high unmet need here. And in fact, there's really no good agents that can be used earlier as a patient's going through and headed towards a crash, to pull them up out of this situation and change the clinical picture, particularly doing so without the side effects. And in fact, we went out and talked to 100 US clinical cardiologists who manage these patients in the cardiac intensive care unit and asked them how much need there was for a new therapy and a new innovation here. And 99 out of 100 of these cardiologists answered it's highly needed. And in fact, when they saw a profile indicative of VISTA, 84% of them responded that they would be highly likely, extremely likely to use ISTA, and most said that it'd be the first thing that they would touch. We know there's a high need. Now, here's another thing that's really unique. As we engaged with the FDA and were pointed to a precedent that was set in writings about shock, a different form of shock called distributive shock associated with sepsis, but there they approved an agent just by demonstrating a significant increase in blood pressure, because blood pressure is really the killer, and that's an acceptable endpoint that you don't have to demonstrate something beyond on a significant increased blood pressure as long as you're not making mortality and safety worse. So that is an exceptionally attractive potential endpoint. We went back and looked at our impact, not just on cardiac function, but blood pressure that I told you about. And in fact, in our heart failure study, particularly at the high dose, we increased systolic blood pressure 15 to 16 millimeters of mercury, which is huge. If you could take a patient who's crashing down into the mid 70s back above 90, that is a highly clinically significant situation in getting that patient stabilized. So we embarked on a 60-patient global study, US and Europe, people in early cardiogenic shock, systolic blood pressures between 75 to 90 due to their heart failure. We studied 2 different doses, 1 to 1.5, infused over 24 hours. And the primary measure is the systolic blood pressure profile at hour 6 and a lot of other blood pressure measures. We're doing echo, we have Holter monitors, and we're going to be presenting this data here in the next several weeks before the end of this month, here in April. And what we're looking for, what good looks like, is a rapid and meaningful improvement in systolic blood pressure in this situation. We're obviously going to be measuring systolic and diastolic cardiac function changes and hopefully see those same type of improvements, and an adequate safety profile that supports a registration type of program. We are going to also on the back end of this study and do some additional dose optimization in an extension study in the course of this year. As we're doing regulatory engagements, we want to study doses that not only infuse longer, like 48 hours, but also span wider blood pressure ranges up towards heart failure, and also study dose titration. So we think, and I think what we're doing here will also more fully illuminate the potential benefits and longer term effects associated with the circuit 2A activation mechanism. So let me summarize this cardiovascular and heart failure and shock area. Acute heart failure is this incredibly large market. Number one reason for hospitalizations in the elderly, and we're the only phase 2 or phase 3 drug in development. We have a rare, unique profile that we're preparing for the next heart failure study. Shock has significant unmet need, and shock has this opportunity to create this faster, cheaper potential pathway. We're really excited about what it's going to show. If you look at our 10K, you'll see our cash position. End of December 31st, end of the year, 22.3 million with 28.4 million shares outstanding. So we'll present this data and flip these data cards with a bit of cash under our feet, and then can define the program ahead. So with that, Robert, do we want to open for some questions?
Yeah, just maybe a couple of items here, and you sort of hit on it there at the end there, but with the top line data for the early cardiogenic shock study coming out in a few weeks here, how do you see this program fitting sort of the strategy, not only for ISTA, but for the company as a whole?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let's begin with ISTA. The cardiogenic shock potential indication is very complementary to the big area of heart failure. And in fact, it potentially could be the first thing to go to the market. I would love to go to the hospitals, frankly, with your first entrant being an area that has such pronounced mortality and unmet need, and that's your first entrant going into the hospital with a bigger indication coming later. So it's very complementary. But at the same time, it also is something that, like I said, from a scale perspective, in terms of cost, timing, speed, potentially supportive regulatory pathway, also means something different for the company. And even if you look at these challenging markets, right, and start defining cost and various pathways and how quickly you can get to milestones that could be value creating, shock presents itself for us and our shareholders this ability that really fits our scale, even as a smaller micro cap, because of that timing, because of the lower cost associated with it. And I have to tell you, even in our business development discussions, people are really looking forward to seeing the shock data as well, as are we.
Great, that's helpful. And, how should we think about the landscape and your opportunities for licensing and partnering with the assets?
It's really interesting. I've been in this business now. I've been the CEO here for 6 years. I've been in this business for 32, right? And I've worked in cardiovascular, acute cardiovascular. We started up a company in the 90s, Centocor, on that, and I managed specialty cardiovasculars at bigger companies like Fraser. And it's really interesting that lately you see in our industry this renewed focus on cardiometabolic, and in particular cardiovascular, and in particular heart failure. Part of that is in chronic heart failure because of the diabetes drugs and some of the data that they're producing. But that has our industry really focused back. And as they look at that, you're starting to see these very valuable transactions in the world of heart failure going on, and this become a therapeutic area priority of focus. We have something really novel with circuit 2A activation. And again, like I said, there's no other phase 2s or phase 3s in the hospitalized space. So it does garnish a lot of attention. And for those of us that have been working in this area, when people look and go, wait a second, shock to get an endpoint like systolic blood pressure potentially, wow, that really has our attention. So I see lots of opportunity, and as we're out actively engaged in this, for potential partnering of the heart failure platform and those follow-on assets, perhaps shock might present an opportunity sooner rather than after this next heart failure study. We want to be a critical care company and maybe retain U.S. co-promotion rights as we continue to feed something that would go towards the hospital channel. But I'm excited about what I'm seeing with this focus and the attention that our assets and platforms have.
Got it. I think we're just at about the end of our time here. Anything else you'd like to sort of share that we haven't touched on for investors as a takeaway here?
No, I appreciate everybody's attention. Like I said, timing is perfect right now. And we look forward to talking with people and telling you what good looks like in these data cards and where we go from here in our plans. We'll have a lot of news flow this year. And like I said, I'll leave you with assets are great, but we have a fantastic team that even in the face of a pandemic really hits the mark and executes. So I'm looking forward to the road ahead and keeping everybody updated.
Fantastic. Well, Craig, thank you very much for the time today. Greatly appreciate it. Again, I'll remind everyone out there that if you're not already signed up for a one-on-one meeting, send me an email, Blum, BLUM, at lythampartners.com, or again, visit the website at lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button. We'll get you taken care of there. So, Craig, again, thank you very much. We hope you all enjoy the conference.
Thank you.